Ramstein Air Base, Germany. My morning was filled with briefings, threat assessments, and lukewarm coffee from a machine that seemed older than me. I barely sat down at my desk when my phone buzzed. A text from my father. "We sold the house. You were gone too long." I froze. Willow House. The place where I spent every summer with my grandmother. The house she left to me specifically in her will, written in careful handwriting. My parents sold it without even telling me first. I reread the message then, a third time. Maybe the desert heat outside the base fogged my brain, except I wasn't even in the desert. I was standing in a climate-controlled command center watching a situation map of the Middle East glow on a giant monitor. The following text came just as fast. "Danny needs help right now. You're never home anyway. We thought you'd understand." Oh, I understood all right. Willow House wasn't just some vacation home sitting idle. It held letters, journals, framed photos, 150 years of family history, tied to military service, Civil War, World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, every branch, every generation. The walls themselves felt like they remembered who we were. And now they'd handed it over just like that, sold the inheritance I planned to return to gutting the history my grandmother had spent her life protecting. Staff Sergeant Michaels appeared at my door with a folder. "Ma'am, they're waiting for you in briefing room 2. "Give me 5 minutes," I replied, masking my voice into calm, detached professionalism. "Family business, just some personal matters," I told myself. The lie tasted bitter even as I said it. I locked my phone and shoved it in my uniform pocket. My parents weren't stupid. They knew I couldn't just hop on a plane mid-deployment to sort this out. They waited until I was 5,000 miles away and buried in classified operations. And Danny, my charming, irresponsible younger brother, failed business after failed business, constant rescues from my parents, always with excuses. "It's just bad luck, Maggie. He's going through a tough time. You wouldn't understand. You're too busy, overseas." Yeah, I was busy. Busy keeping idiots like Danny free to keep screwing up. Suddenly my stomach felt tight, anger and betrayal mixed with a weird sharp humor. They did this. Now of course they picked the moment I wore a uniform that made me unreachable. As I stood there mind racing, I realized something else. This wasn't just property theft. This betrayal cut deep into everything I stood for: service, duty, honor, the things my grandmother raised me on. The screen on my desk flickered, reflecting mission briefings in blocky text. To anyone walking past, I probably looked laser-focused on operations. Inside, though, I was outlining an entirely different mission. But first, I pulled up the Charleston County Public Property Records online. It was all there, plain as day. Transaction complete. Willow House sold for well below market value, a fire sale price. The buyer, Coastal Ventures, LLC. I blinked. Coastal. That name rang a bell. I tapped a few keys, pulling up their corporate records. There he was, Richard Reed, CEO of Coastal, and Sophia Reed's father. Sophia is my brother Danny's fiancée. So not only did my parents sell my inheritance, they'd handed it over to my soon-to-be in-laws at a bargain price. A gift to Danny's new family. Nice. And while they sat comfortably back in Charleston planning weddings, I was reading SIGINT reports and watching drone feeds. I picked up my mug, took one more sip of that terrible coffee, and smiled tightly. Family drama wasn't new, but this time they underestimated me. My boots echoed as I left the office, mind already moving 3 steps ahead. Deployment or not, duty was duty, and I was far from finished. My fingers kept typing fast, pulling up corporate filings, cross-checking names and LLCs, the screen's glow washing over me while my mind stayed sharp and cold. Coastal Ventures LLC wasn't some random developer picking up a cheap estate. It was family, or soon to be. Sophia Reed, Danny's fiancée, came from old Charleston money. Her father, Richard Reed, sat comfortably at the top of that company, and suddenly it all made sense. Willow House wasn't sold, it was handed over like a dowry. I scrolled down and saw the transfer deed, Notarized recorded legal. Catherine Sullivan, my mother, signed on my behalf. Power of attorney. Convenient, except I revoked that power of attorney years ago after she tried raiding my military savings account without telling me. She knew that. She must have counted on the fact that I couldn't check records from Germany while juggling intelligence briefings, but here I was checking anyway. I sat back, exhaling through my nose. There was something bitterly funny about the whole thing. My mother and father didn't even try to hide this. No shell company, no backdoor deal. They marched into the records office and handed over the deed as if they owned my life. And Danny, my golden boy brother who couldn't run a lemonade stand without burning it down, how many times had my parents bailed him out, credit cards, failed startups, expensive business retreats that were just excuses for trips to Miami. And now they handed my inheritance to his new family like a wedding gift. I clenched my jaw as I reviewed the sales contract. They didn't even get a good deal. The appraisal of Willow House at least $4 million, maybe more with waterfront property premiums. The sale price $2.8 million, a full million below what any developer would have paid. This wasn't just betrayal. It was incompetence wrapped in entitlement. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't sneak up on you. There's always a pattern, a build-up, small cracks you ignore, and suddenly you're staring at the whole damn collapse. I reached for my phone again. No more vague texts from Dad. I scrolled back and saw other messages over the years, polite updates, photos of family dinners where my seat was empty, invitations sent too late for me to attend. They weren't mistakes. They were warnings I didn't recognize at the time. Miss me yet. One text from Dad read last Christmas. Yeah, I was starting to lose my patience, but I wasn't about to let this go. No way. Military deployments don't mean surrender. The Service Members Civil Relief Act existed for a reason. Selling property owned by an active duty service member without court approval, illegal. I bookmarked every document and screenshot every record. I even highlighted the notary's name. Sloppy work all around. They thought distance and duty would keep me from noticing. That's what made this so infuriating and honestly impressive in a pathetic way. My computer chimed with an incoming secure message from my commanding officer, reminding me of the next briefing at 1600. I had 45 minutes, more than enough to set wheels in motion. Without hesitation, I pulled up the contact for Michael Carter, a retired JAG attorney and Charleston native who other officers had whispered about when things got ugly back home. I hadn't talked to him in 5 years, but he'd helped a friend when a shady landlord tried evading her during deployment. I typed one sentence: need advice, illegal sale of property while deployed. Willow House, can you help? Not even a minute later. Call me now. Emis. A little smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. Good. He was just as fast as I remembered. I stood feeling a strange lightness in my chest. The betrayal was still there, but now it sat next to something sharper: determination. I grabbed my uniform cap, smoothed it down, and walked straight out of my office toward the secure call booth down the hall. My boots struck the linoleum in a steady rhythm. Anyone passing by would assume I was making a routine operational call, because that's what this was to me now, an operation, and no one ran operations better than I did. I immediately dialed Michael Carter's number in the secure call booth. The line barely rang twice before I heard his voice. Calm, clipped, efficient. Maggie Sullivan, he said, no hesitation. I thought it might be you. I just got your message. What's going on? I wasted no time. My parents sold Willow House while I've been deployed. They used a power of attorney that I revoked years ago. The sale went to my brother's fiance's family, Coastal Ventures LLC. Discounted, sloppy paperwork. Not a single court approval. He didn't even pause to breathe. Jesus, Maggie. Did they notify you in any official way? Not a thing. I found out from a casual text from my dad. He made a low sound of disgust. They picked the wrong soldier to screw over. Look, here's the good news. South Carolina is strict on real property transfers. And if they violated the Service Members Civil Relief Act, that's a federal issue too. This isn't just messy, it's actionable. That was precisely what I wanted to hear. Michael continued, "What documents have you reviewed?" I pulled all the Charleston County records online, I said, rattling off details. Sale price buyer, name notary stamp, deed transfer dates. They sold it a month ago. No indication of a court petition. No service on me, nothing. Michael let out a sharp breath. You need to send me every file you have, scans, screenshots, anything. I can start preparing immediately. His confidence was refreshing. While my family thought distance made me powerless, they forgot I could operate with precision from anywhere on the planet. I'll compile and send it after my next briefing, I said. In the meantime, how exposed are they? Michael laughed, not kindly. Extremely. The revoked power of attorney alone means the deed transfer is voidable. Combine that with no court approval and a sale during active deployment. This isn't just civil liability. This smells like fraud. Potentially criminal fraud. The word hit perfectly. Criminal. This wouldn't be a quiet family squabble with bitter phone calls and ignored emails. This would be a legal storm. And my parents walked straight into it, thinking they'd be fine. Michael kept going, his voice quick, precise. And Maggie, the relationship between Coastal Ventures LLC and your brother that makes this look even worse. Undervaluing the property and selling it to your brother's future father-in-law. It stinks of self-dealing. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. That's exactly what it looks like. They handed over my grandmother's legacy as a wedding favor. Michael was silent for a beat. Maggie, this is one of those cases judges hate, a deployed service member being undermined by their own family. You couldn't write a more infuriating fact pattern. I can almost guarantee any judge who sees this will come down hard. Good. They deserved it hard. I felt a spark of satisfaction for the first time that day. Not because I wanted revenge for its own sake, but because this was a line crossed far beyond family drama. My parents, Catherine and Edward Sullivan, knew the history of Willow House. They knew what it meant to me. My grandmother's journals, Civil War letters, photographs of 5 generations of veterans were packed into that house, all part of our identity, and they tossed it away for convenience to help Danny polish up his image for Sophia Reed and the Reeds' money. I leaned back in the booth, already drafting a list, tasks, evidence, witnesses if needed. The notary's name was right there on the paperwork. I'd pull his commission records too and find out how sloppy he was with his paperwork. I'd line it all up before I even boarded a plane home. The best part? My parents didn't even know this was coming yet. As far as they were concerned, their soldier daughter was still overseas, too busy protecting democracy to notice their betrayal. Michael's voice brought me back. Maggie, I'll draft the preliminary complaint and get working on a hearing schedule. Timing is key. The sooner we can strike, the better. Do it, I said simply. I ended the call feeling steady and ready. This wasn't emotional anymore. It was professional. I gathered my files, organized screenshots into folders, and checked timestamps. Every detail mattered now, dates, amounts, signatures. The monitor across the room flickered with mission updates. My team would assume I was preparing for another intelligence briefing, which in a way I was, except this op was personal. I logged everything into a secure drive and drafted an email to Michael. Precision work, all of it. Names, numbers, attachments, clean, tight, unassailable. As I hit send, I stood up, my body calm, but my mind sharper than ever. Deployment or not, I knew exactly where this was headed, and how I would take them apart. Piece by piece, signature by signature. I walked straight from the secure booth back to my quarters. Every step deliberate, every breath steady, but tight. The moment I closed the door behind me, the silence hit me like a wall. No radio's chatter or briefing schedules, just me and my pulse pounding harder than usual. Sitting on the edge of the narrow military-issue bed, I pulled off my boots slowly, methodically. I wasn't rushing. I didn't have to rush anymore. Everything was already in motion, and my family had no idea. I stared down at my hands, steady, not shaking. Good. I wasn't going to let this become some emotional mess. No tears, no shouting, not even the luxury of venting to a friend. This would stay clean, a surgical operation. But underneath that cold, calm rage sat quiet and patient, the kind of rage that doesn't scream, it waits. The betrayal was personal, yes, but it was also tactical. My parents timed this while I was deployed, assuming I couldn't act. They underestimated me. People always did. They saw the uniform and assumed compliance, not capability. I reached for my laptop again. I knew the next 6 weeks until rotation would be busy, deployments always were, but there was more than enough downtime between operations to work on this case. I could handle mission planning at 0800 and asset recovery at 2000. Dual tracking was practically my specialty. As I organized every document for Michael Carter, I caught myself smiling at the irony. I ran this like an op because that's precisely what it was. Target property theft. Primary threat actors Edward and Catherine Sullivan, assisted by their hapless son Danny. Secondary actor Richard Reed, Coastal Ventures, LLC CEO, and the Golden Child's future father-in-law. Mission objective: full recovery of Willow House fraud exposure and legal accountability. Estimated risk: minimal. I wasn't going in blind. They were. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Dad. "You've been gone so long, Maggie. You don't even understand what Danny's been through." Of course, always about Danny. I didn't bother replying. That was part of their playbook to draw me back into some emotional debate about helping the family while their real agenda ran in the background. I opened a notepad and listed the immediate next steps. Complete digital file for Carter. Check South Carolina court hearing schedule. Confirm military legal protections SCRA power of attorney revocation filing dates. Prepare a personal timeline of deployments practical in court. I could almost hear my grandmother's voice. Plan your fight. Fight your plan. She wasn't a soldier herself, but she understood strategy. Raising me taught her plenty. A knock on my door interrupted my thoughts. Staff Sergeant Michaels again. "Ma'am, briefing starts in 10. You good?" I gave him a nod. "Perfectly fine, Sergeant." He hesitated, maybe sensing I wasn't quite as fine as I claimed, but years of chain of command discipline stopped him from asking questions. Good. I didn't need sympathy. I needed this operation to be airtight. As he left, I glanced at the clock. Briefing in 10 minutes. No problem. I stood, straightened my uniform, and adjusted every ribbon, every pin, every edge until it was perfect. This was about control, after all, control over appearance, control over emotions, control over action, and once back home, control over the courtroom, over... The absurdity struck me again. While I was here planning mission briefs and intel updates, my parents were in Charleston playing amateur real estate moguls. Except their scam was so amateur it practically collapsed on contact. They didn't even hire a good lawyer to cover their tracks. James Callahan, their longtime real estate lawyer, was infamous locally for cutting corners. I remembered him from years back, a man who acted like every property transfer was just paperwork, not lives. They chose Callahan to handle this. Sloppy. I checked the email confirmation from Michael Carter one more time before closing my laptop. Everything I'd collected was now in his hands. He was already pulling court records, notary commissions, transactional histories. The gears were turning fast. I slipped my boots back on with calm precision. This wasn't about confronting my parents with angry phone calls or long emotional conversations. No yelling, no pleading, just legal documents filed properly, backed by evidence they couldn't deny. If there's one thing my deployments have taught me, it's that quiet execution beats loud threats every time. As I reached for my cap again, a stray thought crossed my mind. Danny probably had no clue what was coming. I almost laughed. I stepped back out into the corridor, head-high uniform, immaculate boots, striking the floor with a steady rhythm. The briefing room was to my right, the secure server room to my left, military operations all around, but my real operation was already underway, and I knew that in 6 weeks, when my deployment ended, it would be time to execute it on home soil. The plane's wheels hit the runway at Charleston International Airport with a satisfying jolt, and I felt something shift inside me, focus sharpening tension, solidifying into purpose. I walked off that plane in full uniform, every ribbon polished, every crease perfect. The silver oak leaves of a major caught the overhead lights as I moved through the terminal, blending seamlessly into the crowd, yet standing out in all the ways that mattered. Outside, the late summer heat wrapped around me, humid and heavy, but I didn't care. I was back. And this time, no distance, no duty rotation, no clever family manipulation could keep me from handling this myself. My phone buzzed again at the rental car counter, Mom's name flashing on the screen. I let it ring. Then a text popped up. "We heard you're back. How was your little deployment?" Little deployment. The casual arrogance practically oozed through the screen. I didn't even bother responding with words. Instead, I dialed her number and waited until she picked up. Her voice was smooth, rehearsed. "Maggie, honey, welcome back. We thought." I cut her off. "There's a hearing scheduled tomorrow at 0900. Check your mailbox. Your summons should have arrived yesterday." Silence. Then her tone shifted, brittle but still pretending calm. "Maggie, that's ridiculous. We're family. We don't need courts. Let's talk about this calmly in person, maybe over dinner." I hung up before she could finish the sentence. I pulled from the curb in a silver rental sedan heading downtown. Every street felt familiar and foreign, simultaneously, like visiting a place I once loved but no longer recognized. The corner diner where I used to meet friends was now a trendy cafe. The bookstore that sold military history hardcovers had become a boutique selling overpriced handbags. But when I turned onto Ashley Avenue and saw the wrought iron gates of Willow House, a different emotion hit: cold, precise disappointment. The house looked tired. Grass, overgrown shutters, askew, signs of rushed repairs visible from the street. A for sale sign, weathered and crooked, still stood near the mailbox, a grim reminder of how casually they had disposed of it. I parked without hesitation, stepped through the gate, and strolled up the brick path. Every step felt deliberate, my boots crunching against loose gravel. The front door was unlocked. Of course it was. Inside, the air smelled musty and stale, like no one cared enough to keep the house alive. Dust on the grand piano, faded rugs in the foyer. Walls that once displayed generations of military portraits, now empty picture hooks dangling uselessly. In the parlor, moving boxes sat half-packed and forgotten, some marked donate, others trash. I knelt, lifting the flaps of one. Inside were my grandmother's journals. The handwriting I knew by heart stared back at me from yellowed pages. A sentence stood out immediately: "Willow House belongs to Maggie. She understands this is not just a home, but a responsibility." I ran my fingers over the words, feeling something sharp and solid settle in my chest. Responsibility. That was the key. Not nostalgia, not sentimentality. Duty. The same duty that brought me back, not just as a soldier but as the rightful heir, as the one person who understood what this house meant, not just to me, but to everyone whose name was once etched into these walls. I moved through the rooms, quickly taking mental inventory. Heirloom furniture, trunks of letters from the Civil War, my grandfather's Navy medals, framed photos from both World Wars and Korea, all treated like clutter to be sold off or discarded. Danny's fingerprints were all over this, the rush to sell, the careless handling, the blatant disrespect. None of this surprised me. He never cared about history, only opportunity. When I returned to the porch, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn. I stood at the railing and took a slow breath. Charleston's humidity didn't bother me. The mess inside didn't bother me. Even the betrayal itself didn't shake me anymore. I felt clear, precise, resolved. The courthouse downtown was just a few blocks away. I'd be there tomorrow morning, standing tall in that same uniform, backed not just by legal arguments but by the weight of history itself. I brushed dust from my sleeves as I stepped back inside Willow House, shutting the front door behind me, this time firmly. The latch clicked into place with finality, as if the house itself approved. As I moved through the parlor into the dining room, the floor creaked under my boots. The long oak table, once polished to a shine, was buried under cardboard boxes, half-wrapped china, and a plastic storage bin labeled Misk. I tilted my head. Misk, the audacity. I pulled the lid off that bin and found my grandmother's photo albums neatly stacked but ignored. Photos from every era, sepia-toned prints of my great-grandfather standing proudly in his Civil War uniform, portraits of my grandmother as a child, seated on this very porch, a candid snapshot of me at 10 years old reading on that swing-out back. I remembered that summer perfectly. While my parents traveled Europe on business, my grandmother taught me how to polish brass military buttons, fold a flag properly, and why every corner of this house mattered. She never said it explicitly, but I knew Willow House was meant for me. Even then, my parents had always hated that connection. They thought the house was too old, too much work, too sentimental. It was no accident they listed it as soon as they thought I couldn't defend it. I kept walking, heading upstairs, where the air felt heavier, like the house was holding its breath. At the end of the hallway, my grandmother's study still smelled faintly of her perfume, lavender, and old paper. Her journals filled one shelf, stacked in perfect rows, untouched, except for the box I had found downstairs. They'd nearly thrown all of this out. They'd been days away from discarding the archive of our family's history just to clean out the house faster for the buyers. In the corner sat a battered cedar chest. I lifted the lid carefully and found my great-grandfather's Civil War letters bundled in twine. Next to them, my grandfather's Navy service medals and my father's old Marine Corps dress blues, the same uniform he used to lecture me about duty while quietly planning this betrayal behind my back. The irony wasn't lost on me. I took a deep breath, my fingers brushing the medals and patches. Everything here had survived generations, wars, depressions, hurricanes, but it had almost fallen to the casual carelessness of my own family. It wouldn't happen. Not while I was alive. Downstairs, the floorboards creaked again, a loose shutter outside banging gently in the breeze. I walked back down, flipping light switches out of habit. None of them worked. The utilities had been shut off already. Of course they had. Even in the dim evening light, the cracks in the facade were noticeable. Rushed patchwork repairs on the banisters, cheap paint slapped over peeling wallpaper, mismatched replacement tiles in the foyer. They hadn't restored this place. They'd stripped it. I entered the kitchen and opened a cupboard, revealing more hastily packed boxes. One was labeled Family Silver, another to sell Low Priority. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Low priority, huh? To them, this was just stuff to liquidate. To me, every plate, every fork, every tarnished spoon told a story. There was a calm clarity to it now. This wasn't about emotional attachment or nostalgia anymore. This was about stewardship, about defending the legacy of someone who trusted me to protect it. It was fitting. They thought they could outmaneuver me while I was deployed, assuming I'd be too far away, too distracted, too busy serving my country. They didn't realize this house was part of what I served. I glanced at my watch. Less than 16 hours until that courtroom would open its doors and my parents would finally understand the extent of their mistake. The house felt quiet around me, but not empty. Every surface seemed to hum with the weight of memory and expectation, not sad or haunted, just waiting. I locked the front door as I left, this time taking the key from under the welcome mat, where they'd lazily left it. Sloppy. Typical. The key slid easily into my pocket. No one else would be using it anytime soon. Outside, Charleston's heat lingered, but the air felt different now, lighter somehow. As I returned to the car, my boots tapped steadily against the brick path. Every step away from Willow House felt purposeful, deliberate, the kind of measured retreat that comes before the real push forward. The courthouse was just down the road, but I wasn't thinking about geography. I was thinking about precision timing execution. If there was one thing I had learned in uniform, it was that no battle is won in the heat of the moment. It's won in the preparation. And this time, every document was ready, every argument lined up, every piece of evidence in place. I adjusted my uniform collar one last time in the courthouse restroom mirror. The polished silver oak leaves on my shoulder glinted under the harsh fluorescent lights. Everything about my appearance was deliberate, crisp, clean, precise. I walked down the hallway, my boots tapping steadily on the marble floor as I approached courtroom 2B. The bailiff at the door nodded politely, holding it open as I stepped inside. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, dark wood paneling, old wooden benches, a slight musty scent of too many years of bureaucracy packed into one space. I could already see my parents, Catherine and Edward, seated at the plaintiff's table. Danny sat beside them, his head slightly bowed, but a smug little smirk still visible. Mom was dressed perfectly, of course, understated jewelry, expensive suit, the image of respectability. Dad looked uncomfortable in his too-tight blazer, his eyes darting anywhere but toward me. They didn't expect this. They didn't expect me in full dress uniform standing there with my attorney beside me. Michael Carter was already flipping through documents, calm as ever. At the back of the room, Sophia Reed sat quietly, future Mrs. Danny Sullivan pretending to look concerned, but scanning everyone, calculating. The judge's clerk entered and announced, "All rise." We all stood as Judge William Caldwell stepped out from chambers. He was exactly as I remembered from old newspaper photos, barrel-chested, stone-faced, wearing glasses that made him look even more intimidating. Retired Marine colonel turned family court judge. Perfect. He took his seat without ceremony and scanned the files in front of him, then spoke with a deep, slow, cutting voice. This is a hearing regarding the contested sale of the property known as Willow House, Charleston County, South Carolina. Parties present. Michael spoke first, calm and clear. Michael Carter, representing Major Margaret Sullivan, United States Air Force. At the other table, my parents' lawyer stood, James Callahan. Of course they'd hired him. He cleared his throat and babbled too quickly. Your Honor, James Callahan, representing Edward and Catherine Sullivan and Daniel Sullivan. I sat down quietly, feeling every eye on me. Caldwell read a few more lines from the case file, then paused and looked over his glasses at the two tables. Before we proceed, let me ask one question. Who here actually owned Willow House at the time of this transaction? Michael spoke again. That would be Major Margaret Sullivan, Your Honor. The property was left to her exclusively in the will of the late Evelyn Sullivan. At that, Mom let out a soft, dismissive laugh that carried just enough volume to echo slightly. Your Honor, she said smoothly. We understand our daughter's position, but she's just a soldier. She hasn't lived in that house for years. The house was neglected. We acted in the best interest of the family. The judge turned his head sharply, his gaze pinning her in place. Just a soldier, Mrs. Sullivan, he repeated, voice low but sharp. Mom smiled, though her fingers clutched the edge of the table. We meant no disrespect, Your Honor. We simply meant that Maggie Major Sullivan doesn't really have a life here anymore. She's been deployed well almost constantly. Her tone dripped with false innocence, that polished arrogance she used with demanding clients at her real estate firm. But it didn't work here. Caldwell looked down at the file again and cleared his throat deliberately. For the record, he said loudly enough for the whole courtroom to hear, that's Major Sullivan, active duty, United States Air Force, decorated officer, 3 combat deployments, recipient of the Bronze Star Medal, and the Defense Meritorious Service Medal. The entire room froze. Michael sat perfectly still, but I could see the corner of his mouth twitch slightly in satisfaction. Even Callahan seemed to shrink slightly in his chair, looking down at his notes as if they'd protect him. Mom didn't move at all. but her face tightened almost imperceptibly. Dad looked everywhere except at me. Judge Caldwell continued. We will proceed under the presumption that Major Sullivan's status as an active duty service member is central to this case, particularly given the timing of the sale and the invocation of an expired power of attorney. His tone left no room for debate. Callahan began shuffling papers frantically. Your Honor, I'd like to clarify our client's intent. Caldwell cut him off with a single raised finger. Intent will matter later. For now, I want everyone here to understand exactly who they are speaking about and exactly how seriously this court takes the rights of an active duty officer deployed overseas. That quiet stillness fell over the room again. You could almost hear everyone breathing shallow, nervous, restrained. I sat straight, expression neutral, but inside I felt it not just satisfaction, but control. My family had underestimated me completely, and this judge was not in the mood to indulge their revisionist history. Caldwell tapped his pen twice against the folder before him and nodded slightly toward Michael. Proceed, Mr. Carter. Michael Carter stood up smoothly, buttoning his jacket as he walked to the lectern. His voice was calm, but carried across the courtroom effortlessly, like a surgeon making his first incision precise and impossible to ignore. Your Honor, he began today. We will present documentation that goes far beyond a simple family misunderstanding. Callahan, my parents' lawyer, already looked nervous, flipping pages that wouldn't save him. My parents sat stiffly, trying to look composed, but I could see Dad's knee bouncing and Mom's lips pressed into a tight line. Michael continued. We have property records, financial transactions, and email correspondence that paint a very clear picture of collusion, self-dealing, and a blatant disregard for both state and federal law. He reached into a leather folder and handed copies to the bailiff who delivered them to Judge Caldwell and Callahan. Michael gestured to the documents. Your Honor, Exhibit A is the notarized deed transfer signed using a power of attorney that was revoked and filed as such with Charleston County Records 5 years ago. Caldwell didn't react outwardly, but I could feel the air change as he scanned the first few pages. Michael kept going. Exhibit B emails between Catherine Sullivan and Richard Reed, CEO of Coastal Ventures LLC, discussing not only the planned transfer, but explicitly referencing a family arrangement to ensure that Willow House would pass into Mr. Reed's hands at a preferential rate. Mom's face froze. Dad shifted uncomfortably. Callahan leaned over quickly and whispered to Mom, but she brushed him off with her manicured hand. Michael pressed on without missing a beat. Exhibit C financial records showing that immediately following the sale, a personal payment of $45,000 was made from Coastal Ventures LLC directly to a personal account controlled solely by Catherine Sullivan, labeled simply as a consulting fee. That was it. The moment I watched Dad's face blanch, the color draining as he realized what had just been said. I watched Mom's practiced calm falter for the first time as she crossed her arms tightly. Callahan's whisper turned frantic, but Judge Caldwell raised a hand to silence him again. Mr. Carter, Caldwell said slowly, this payment you are alleging, it was a kickback disguised as a consulting fee. Michael didn't hesitate. Yes, Your Honor. The timeline, the documentation, and the complete absence of any legitimate consulting contract make it clear what this was. The judge nodded slowly, his fingers steepled as he scanned the papers before him. Then he looked directly at Callahan. Counsel, were you aware of these facts before today? Callahan's forehead was glistening now. Your Honor, my clients assured me this was a simple family matter, a property dispute. I had no knowledge of any of these transactions. Caldwell's tone was cold. I strongly suggest, Mr. Callahan, that you read your file more carefully before you speak again. Callahan sat down slowly, his head lowered, shoulders sagging. The quiet in the room was heavy now. No one on my parents' side dared to make eye contact with anyone. Michael spoke again, voice as steady as ever. And finally, Your Honor, Exhibit D correspondence, showing that Edward Sullivan and Daniel Sullivan discussed selling below market value specifically to avoid competitive bidding, writing that this would keep things in the family and that Maggie would never know the difference. At that, Danny let out a loud sigh and buried his face in his hands. The phrase was right there in black and white. She'll never know the difference. Oh, but I did. And now everyone else did too. Caldwell's gaze swept the courtroom again, pausing briefly on each member of my family before turning back to Michael. These documents will be entered into evidence, he said. This court recognizes that the allegations presented are no longer simply about a disputed property sale, but suggest a broader conspiracy to defraud a deployed active duty service member. He adjusted his glasses, his tone hardening even further. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is something this court takes extremely seriously. At the plaintiff's table, my mother sat ramrod straight, her face unreadable, except for her tightly clenched jaw. Dad finally looked up, but his eyes seemed distant, as if he was still processing that the scheme had collapsed in 20 minutes. Danny stayed slumped, looking the useless opportunist he had always been. Michael nodded to me gently before returning to his seat. No one spoke. The courtroom was so silent that even the creak of a leather chair felt loud. Judge Caldwell shuffled the papers neatly and spoke one final sentence before returning to his notes. "This matter is far from resolved," he said simply. I kept my face blank, but inside, I felt the balance shift further. The plan was working precisely as intended. Precise, efficient, undeniable. I leaned back slightly in my chair, hands resting calmly on the table. Across the room, Danny rubbed his temples like a man stuck in a hangover he fully earned. Mom sat frozen, fingers white-knuckled on the armrest. Dad kept whispering to Callahan, though by now even Callahan looked like he wanted to be elsewhere. Judge Caldwell called forward the next witness, voice firm. "Mr. Hayes, please approach." The private investigator Michael had hired walked confidently to the stand. John Hayes was ex-law enforcement, sharp-eyed, calm, the kind of man you wanted tracking a paper trail. Michael had prepped him for this moment, and it showed. After being sworn in, Hayes spoke with measured precision. "Your Honor, I was retained to investigate the sale of Willow House and any irregularities surrounding the transaction." Michael nodded, stepping closer. "Mr. Hayes, can you describe for the court what you found?" Hayes straightened in his seat. "Yes, sir. During my investigation, I obtained banking records and communication logs between Coastal Ventures LLC and the Sullivan family. In reviewing these, I identified not only the $45,000 transfer marked as a consulting fee, but several other anomalies, including backdated invoices, unusually rapid escrow processing, and evidence that the appraisal used for the sale was artificially deflated by roughly $900,000. There was a rustle from the plaintiff's table. Mom's polished calm cracked her head, whipping toward Danny with a sharp whisper. Danny snapped back, defensive eyes darting. Michael lifted a hand smoothly. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes. And just to clarify who requested the appraisal." Hayes didn't hesitate. The appraisal was arranged by Mrs. Catherine Sullivan. Specifically, records show she contacted the appraiser directly and provided instructions to focus on deferred maintenance and neighborhood comparables that were several years outdated. Mom let out a harsh breath through her nose. Michael looked at the judge. No further questions. Callahan rose from his chair like a man walking toward a firing squad. His voice was tight. "Mr. Hayes, you're suggesting my clients deliberately undervalued the home." Hayes's face remained calm. "I'm not suggesting, I'm providing documented evidence." Callahan opened his mouth, closed it again, and sat down. For a second, the room was just quiet, not the kind of polite quiet you find in courtrooms, but the tense, stifling quiet of a family gathering gone public. Judge Caldwell adjusted his glasses, leaning slightly forward. "Mr. Carter, does your client wish to make any statement at this time?" Michael turned to me, eyebrows raised in silent question. I gave him a slight nod. I stood smoothing the front of my uniform and walked to the witness stand. My boots clicked evenly against the floor. No hesitation, no nerves, just controlled breath, steady posture, and the familiar weight of my rank on my shoulders. After taking the oath, I looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor," I said, my voice clear and measured, "I've served 18 months overseas conducting operations under NATO command. Before that, I completed deployments in Iraq and Syria. While I was deployed, I received a text from my father informing me that my family had sold Willow House, the home willed to me by my grandmother, which contains over a century of family military history." I paused, letting the words settle. No theatrics, no drama, just fact. I did not consent to this sale. I did not grant permission. I revoked power of attorney from my parents years prior after a financial dispute. I was never informed about any financial difficulty requiring this sale, nor was I consulted about the terms. I glanced briefly toward my parents. Mom's face was stone. Dad looked away. I looked back at the judge. "Your Honor, I do not stand here today out of anger or revenge. I stand here because this house is part of my family's legacy, and because no service member deployed in defense of their country should have to wonder if their own family will rob them blind while they're away." There was a slight shift in the room, a breath held, a weight felt. Judge Caldwell gave a single nod. "Thank you, Major Sullivan." Callahan rubbed his forehead as I returned to my seat, visibly sweating. Danny shot me a slight, childish glare, the same look he gave me when we were kids, and I refused to cover for his screw-ups. Michael leaned over and murmured, "That couldn't have gone better." The judge shuffled papers in front of him, his expression unreadable but his eyes sharp. He looked toward the plaintiff's table, tapping his pen twice, then spoke calmly but cuttingly. "I want to be clear. This court recognizes patterns here that go beyond civil negligence. The combination of forged authority, self-enrichment, and exploitation of a deployed military officer raises the possibility of criminal referral." No one spoke. I sat still, composed. The feeling wasn't victory, not yet. It was control, the complete understanding that facts, evidence, and precision had done their work. Exactly as planned. Judge Caldwell leaned back, steepled his fingers again, and gestured quietly to Michael Carter. "Proceed." I sat perfectly still, watching Michael Carter stand and straighten his jacket, stepping calmly to the lectern. His tone didn't rise. His voice didn't waver. It was steady, deliberate, and every word felt like another brick, laid carefully into place. "Your Honor," Michael began, "what this courtroom has heard over the past 2 days is not just a family misunderstanding. It is not a mistake, nor a situation born from miscommunication or good intentions gone wrong." His gaze drifted momentarily toward my parents. "What we've seen here is a clear pattern of deception, a deliberate attempt to exploit the absence of a family member who was serving this country in uniform, who was deployed in harm's way, and could not physically be present to defend what was legally and morally hers." Michael let that sentence settle before he continued. "The documents speak for themselves. A revoked power of attorney used anyway. A property transfer at nearly $1 million below market value. A payment disguised as a consulting fee with no contract or legitimate explanation. Emails spelling out the intent to ensure this sale went through without opposition." I watched my parents as he spoke. Dad was no longer pretending to be calm. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 2 days. His eyes stayed down, fingers fidgeting with a repeatedly clicked and unclicked pen. Mom still tried to project an image of dignity, back straight, chin slightly raised, but her jaw tightened slightly every time Michael said the word fraud. Danny sat motionless, expression somewhere between guilt and resentment, refusing to look at anyone. Michael's voice lowered, more personal now. "Major Sullivan was betrayed while serving abroad. While she honored her duty to this country, her family dishonored theirs to her. This is not simply about a house. This is about trust, legacy, and justice." I noticed a few people in the gallery, random observers, maybe clerks or junior attorneys, leaning forward, now drawn into the simplicity of that statement. Michael continued, voice sharp again. Willow House was not neglected, abandoned, or forgotten. It was entrusted. Entrusted to Major Sullivan by a grandmother who understood exactly who would respect its value, a soldier who understands duty better than most. And that trust was violated deliberately by those sitting right here in this courtroom. He turned back toward the judge. Your Honor, we are not asking for sympathy. We are asking for justice. Justice under South Carolina law and under the federal protections that exist specifically to ensure deployed service members cannot be taken advantage of in precisely this way. Michael gestured toward the documents neatly stacked on the table. The evidence is clear. The violations are clear. The damage is real. He paused for just a second, his delivery perfectly timed. This isn't just theft, Your Honor. It's betrayal while she served. Those words felt like they echoed slightly in the small courtroom. Even Callahan sat frozen, his face pale, hands folded but trembling slightly. Michael nodded respectfully and sat down. The judge let the silence linger longer before glancing at Callahan. Closing argument, Mr. Callahan. Callahan rose slowly, looking almost reluctant. His voice was quieter than before, missing the false confidence he'd projected when this hearing began. Your Honor, my clients believed they were acting in the best interest of their family. Yes, mistakes were made, but this was not a calculated fraud. Judge Caldwell raised one eyebrow, leaning forward just slightly. Callahan hesitated mid-sentence, faltering, then seemed to deflate visibly. He cleared his throat and sat down without another word. That was it. No speech about family loyalty, no attempt to justify the unjustifiable. Even Callahan knew the weight of the evidence made such a defense pointless. I kept my expression completely neutral. Inside, though, the feeling was one of calm inevitability. Caldwell adjusted the stack of documents in front of him slowly, methodically, a man used to power and restraint. His gaze scanned the room one last time. The court recognizes that all arguments have been presented. I will review the full record thoroughly before issuing my ruling. He didn't rush his words or allow even a flicker of drama, just precision. Across the room, my parents sat frozen. Danny looked trapped. His usual casual arrogance replaced by something closer to dread. Mom's mask of control remained, but barely. Her lips were pressed so tightly the color had drained from them. Dad still stared at the pen in his hands, clicking it slowly, rhythmically, like a man hoping for a distraction. I sat perfectly still, hands folded, boots planted firmly on the worn floorboards. No rush, no need for further commentary. I had done everything necessary. The operation was nearly complete. Facts, documents, witnesses, records, all lined up like soldiers on parade, disciplined, unassailable. Judge Caldwell steepled his fingers and leaned back, his expression unreadable. The courtroom sat silent, no sound but the faint hum of the overhead ventilation, every eye waiting for the next precise word or motion. I kept my breathing steady, posture sharp, and mind clear. Every piece was where it needed to be, and there was nothing more to say, only what would come next. The next morning, I arrived at the courthouse, early, uniform pressed to perfection, ribbons, aligned shoes, polished so well they caught the faintest hint of the rising Charleston sun. Every detail mattered. I moved through the halls with the same discipline I used, walking into a briefing room, focused, purposeful. Judge Caldwell entered the courtroom precisely at 0900, his robe flowing, but his steps sharp and deliberate. The courtroom was packed but hushed, as if everyone understood without being told that this day mattered more than the two before. He sat down, removed his glasses, and spoke without preamble. This court has reviewed the evidence presented over the past 2 days. The facts are clear, the documentation is complete, and the conduct in question leaves little room for interpretation. His voice was steady, almost casual, but every word landed with weight. My parents sat side by side at the plaintiff's table. Dad's posture slumped. The defiance he carried on day one completely drained. Mom sat stiff, trying to maintain the image of calm authority, but even she couldn't stop glancing sideways at Callahan, who no longer met her gaze. Danny sat a few feet back, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. Even Sophia Reed hadn't bothered to show up today. Judge Caldwell continued. This court finds that Edward and Catherine Sullivan, along with Daniel Sullivan, engaged in conduct designed to circumvent legal requirements and exploit Major Margaret Sullivan's absence while deployed overseas. His tone didn't change, but that sentence caused an almost physical shift in the room. Heads turned, bodies straightened, silence deepened. He flipped through the papers before him without hurrying, then continued. The power of attorney used to transfer Willow House was demonstrably revoked as shown by records filed properly and on time with Charleston County. The sale was conducted at a price well below fair market value with clear evidence of intentional undervaluation and involved direct financial transactions between Catherine Sullivan and the buyer's representative transactions that cannot be reasonably explained as legitimate consulting fees. He paused just long enough for those words to settle. This is not simply a civil dispute. This is fraud. My parents sat frozen now, their entire facade collapsing in real time. Dad didn't even blink. Mom's eyes were locked forward, lips pressed into a pale, bloodless line. Caldwell's voice remained calm but direct. The sale of Willow House is hereby voided. Title and full ownership will revert immediately to Major Margaret Sullivan. No further sale transfer or encumbrance shall occur without this court's express written approval. He turned slightly, adjusting his glasses again. Furthermore, this court finds sufficient evidence to refer this matter for potential criminal prosecution under both South Carolina law and the Federal Service Members Civil Relief Act. At that, Callahan visibly winced. Mom flinched slightly. Danny stared at the floor, unmoving. Caldwell kept going without pause. The court hereby orders Edward and Catherine Sullivan to reimburse all legal fees incurred by Major Sullivan, as well as punitive damages in the amount of $250,000 to be paid directly to Major Sullivan within 30 days. Every head in the courtroom turned toward my parents, but they didn't react. No protests, no whispered strategy, just shock, plain and unfiltered. The judge tapped his pen once on the bench and addressed them directly. This court takes seriously the obligations we all have to protect those who serve this country. To betray that trust while a daughter was deployed overseas, to exploit that distance for financial gain, is unconscionable. Then he shifted his gaze to Callahan. And, Mr. Callahan, the court strongly advises you to review your client intake processes in the future. Due diligence is not optional. Callahan nodded meekly. Caldwell straightened his papers with meticulous care. This court stands adjourned. His gavel struck the block with a clean, sharp knock. As the room stirred back to life, murmurs, shuffling papers, creaking benches, I remained seated a moment longer, breathing steadily. Michael leaned toward me, voice low but steady. Well executed. I nodded once, standing up with deliberate ease. My parents didn't move. Mom's fingers gripped the table's edge so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Dad just sat there, shoulders sagging, pen still clutched uselessly in his right hand. Danny finally raised his head but didn't meet my eyes. I didn't bother speaking to any of them. There was nothing left to say. I strolled toward the door, every step measured. My boots echoed clearly against the old wood floors as I exited the courtroom, uniform, sharp, head high, pace steady. Outside, the Charleston sun was higher now, the air warm, the streets, busy city life continuing as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something very real. Justice, not the loud, messy kind, but the precise, disciplined kind, had been served, and Willow House, at last, was mine again. The automatic doors of the courthouse slid open, and a wave of heat rolled over me, humid and heavy, but somehow lighter than the courtroom air I had left behind. As I walked to the rental car, my boots met the pavement with a steady rhythm. No rush, no glance back. As I drove down Meeting Street, Charleston looked precisely the same as when I'd arrived. But something fundamental had shifted. The weight wasn't on me anymore. I parked outside Willow House and stepped through the front gate, key in hand, my key. I didn't even hesitate as I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house felt different too. Or maybe I had just changed. Same dusty corners, same tired shutters, but I walked through the entryway like I owned it. Because now, without question, I did. A few boxes still sat in the front parlor where my parents had hastily packed what they thought they could sell. A battered cardboard box labeled Misk Family Stuff sat by the stairs, half-torn tape curling at the edges. I leaned down, flipped the lid back, and stared briefly. Inside, jumbled and carelessly packed, were old family photographs. My grandparents, my dad as a teenager in his dress blues, my mother holding me as a baby on the willow porch. They'd tossed it all in a box labeled Misk. That told me everything I needed to know about how they valued this place and how they valued me. I took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, and didn't touch a thing. Their clutter, their mess, it could wait. My phone vibrated against my hip. Another text from Mom. "How could you do this to your family?" The irony nearly made me laugh, as if somehow I was the one who had betrayed them. I didn't reply. I scrolled up through the long chain of texts she, Dad, and Danny had sent over the past few weeks. The pattern was clear now. Guilt trips, manipulation disguised as concern, reassurances that it was for the good of the family. Not a single apology among them, not even close. I set the phone down on an empty shelf and left it buzzing. Upstairs, the old bedrooms were bare but still carried the faintest scent of cedar and lavender. My grandmother's room was exactly as I remembered before the chaos began. Her old rocking chair still sat by the window, its cushion sun-faded but intact. I sat down carefully, letting the chair creak gently beneath my weight. I rested my hands on the arms, felt the worn wood beneath my fingers, and allowed myself a long, quiet breath. Outside the window, the willow trees swayed gently in the summer breeze. No noise, no anger, just peace. Back downstairs, I found a box under the staircase labeled Wedding Decorations, Danny and Sophia. A cheap plastic banner reading Future Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan Reed peeked out the side. I didn't even bother moving it. According to what Michael had told me after the court hearing, Sophia's family had wasted no time distancing themselves after the verdict. The fraudulent sale had spooked them, and so had the public record now attached to Danny's name. The engagement was over within days. Danny hadn't even bothered to reach out, not directly. Probably too embarrassed or too busy wallowing in self-pity. Either way, I didn't care. Dad and Mom, meanwhile, faced something much worse than just losing the house. Criminal charges were coming next. Michael had made that clear before we left the courthouse. The referral to the district attorney's office was already on its way. They hadn't just lost Willow House. They'd lost their reputations, their plans for a retirement funded by a fraudulent sale, their hope of salvaging Danny's reputation by marrying him into the Reeds' wealth. All of it gone. It wasn't revenge. I hadn't needed revenge, just clarity and justice. The difference between us was stark now. They saw Willow House as a quick sale, a payday, a convenient way to cover Danny's debts. I saw it for what it was: history, legacy, duty. I walked back onto the porch, resting my arms on the wooden railing, feeling the evening air cooling slightly as the sun dipped lower over Charleston Harbor. The key to the front door felt solid in my pocket. Inside the house, the dust and clutter would eventually get cleaned. The portraits would go back up. The records and journals would be restored and preserved correctly. But for now, just standing there steady and calm was enough. I closed the front door behind me, locking it slowly and deliberately. The solid click of the lock felt final, not dramatic, not symbolic, just right. The air was still warm as I crossed the front porch and entered the yard. The willow trees swayed gently overhead, their branches rustling softly, even quietly. They seemed to approve of the house returning where it belonged. Inside my pocket, I felt the outline of my grandmother's journal, the same one I'd pulled from that half-packed box days ago. I walked to the porch swing where she used to sit, flipped open the worn cover, and reread one of her last entries. She understands that some things are worth more than money. That single sentence hit me differently now. It didn't feel like nostalgia. It felt like a blueprint. The truth was, Willow House didn't just belong to me because a court said so, or because my grandmother willed it to me. It belonged to me because I was the only one who understood what it represented: sacrifice, duty, service, continuity. I didn't need it as a private residence. I didn't want to hold on to it out of spite or sentimentality. It needed to serve. That thought sat heavily but comfortably, fitting perfectly in place, and the decision became clear. The following week, I made the first call to a nonprofit specializing in PTSD recovery for veterans. Then I called a local historical preservation group. I explained my plan simply not as a plea, but as an offer. Willow House would become a retreat and community space for veterans, a place where those who had served could rest, reflect, and heal. A place where the walls would no longer just hold family photographs, but would carry stories that mattered. It would be a house that served those who served, not a museum frozen in time, but a living, breathing sanctuary. That decision wasn't about cleansing the house of what had happened, but about claiming control of what would be next. As I began sorting through the old trunks and boxes left behind, I found items my parents hadn't bothered to value: war letters, medals, dusty uniforms with name tags worn but still legible, even a family Bible with annotations written in my grandmother's careful hand. They saw junk. I saw legacy. Each artifact would have a place in this house, not locked away or hidden behind glass. They'd be displayed where veterans could see them, hold them, and remember that they were part of a long line of people who served something larger than themselves. Every room would have a purpose again. One evening, as I worked through a stack of old photographs, my phone vibrated quietly next to me. Another message from my mother, her text short but sharp: classic, Catherine. How could you turn your back on your family like this? I stared at it momentarily before typing my brief, direct, unshakable response. You saw price tags. I saw legacy. Now this house will serve those who served. Then, without hesitation, I blocked her number. No more explanations. No more justifications. Willow House was mine, but more importantly, it had a future, one thing my parents could never have imagined because they had never seen its value the way I did. When the first group of veterans arrived weeks later, I stood quietly at the edge of the front lawn, watching as they crossed the threshold. Some paused, taking in the house's age and history. Others walked straight in as if they belonged, which, of course, they did. The furniture was solid but straightforward again. The portraits were hung back in their rightful places, polished and clean. The journals were shelved neatly in the study. The kitchen was stocked and ready. The walls didn't feel heavy anymore. They felt alive. That night, I sat on the porch swing where my grandmother used to tell me stories about the generations before me, the ones who had served in wars I'd only read about. The swing creaked gently beneath me, steady and familiar. Charleston Harbor glimmered in the moonlight beyond the trees, and somewhere across the world, soldiers were standing watch in places far from home as I once had. They would never know my name. But that wasn't the point. The point was that this house would now serve them in a small but meaningful way, not because it was easy, not because it was profitable, but because that's what legacy truly meant. I sat quietly on that porch swing a little longer, letting the night air settle around me. No bitterness, no noise, just a quiet understanding that everything that needed to happen had happened precisely, deliberately, fully. Willow House had survived more than storms and time. It had survived betrayal, and now it would serve a purpose bigger than any petty family drama or selfish scheme. My grandmother would have wanted this ending not a fight for ownership, but a fight for meaning. And I had won not by yelling or pleading, but by respecting what mattered most: legacy, duty, service. If this story spoke to you, if you understand the value of standing your ground when family drama turns toxic, when betrayal calls for clarity, then you'll appreciate stories like this one. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more true family revenge stories, gripping revenge stories, and powerful family drama that shows what justice looks like. Your support keeps these stories alive. Some betrayals deserve to be heard.